Story 1. 72 Hours in the Andes. The story of Javier Reyes. The air was thin. It clawed at his lungs like invisible fingers every time he drew breath. Snowflakes melted on Javier's cheeks, streaking his face with icy trails as he clutched the jagged rock ledge. Somewhere below, his climbing partner Daniel wasn't moving. A shriek of wind tore through the Andes ridge and drowned out Javier's own scream. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about redemption. Javier Reyes wasn't supposed to be on that ridge. The plan was simple: reach Base Camp 3 by midday, assess conditions, and return to Base Camp 2 before sundown. The weather window was short, and the Andes were unforgiving. But when Daniel Martinez, the more experienced of the two, suggested they push higher just a little, Javier didn't object. Javier was 31. Born in Bariloche, Argentina, he'd grown up around snow-capped peaks, but only took up serious climbing in his late 20s. The mountains called to him like a prayer whispered in the dark. Steady, haunted, impossible to ignore. His father had died in a skiing accident when Javier was 9, and though his mother begged him not to take risks, Javier always felt that part of his father's spirit remained in the high places. Daniel was different. A Chilean mountaineer with 5 summit records to his name, he was lean, weathered, and walked like gravity owed him a favor. He met Javier in an expedition group online, and they clicked instantly. Over beers and maps, they planned a climb that would become the defining experience of their lives. It was supposed to be a test run. They started the climb on March 7, 2023. The sky was clear, though clouds lingered in the forecast for the week. Their objective, Cerro Marmolejo, a glaciated stratovolcano on the border of Chile and Argentina, notorious for swift storms and crevasses hidden under thick snow shelves. Day 1 was smooth. The rhythm of their boots on packed snow, the smell of pine near the lower trails, the sharp silence above the tree line. It was everything they'd hoped for. On the second night, at Camp 2, they shared dehydrated soup and swapped stories. Daniel talked about an avalanche he'd survived in Patagonia. Javier talked about his late father, his mother's disapproval, and his own fear of being ordinary. Daniel nodded slowly, then lit a cigarette. Ordinary, he said, kills more people than cliffs. On the third morning, the weather shifted. The wind picked up around 10 a.m., and clouds gathered faster than expected. They should have turned back, but they didn't. Just past a narrow ice corridor known as the Serpent's Path, Daniel pointed to a crag above them, one not marked on the maps they carried. "Looks passable," he said, eyes scanning the sky. Javier hesitated. "That's not on the route?" "Exactly." And that was it. They diverted west, off the established trail, onto uncharted ice. Within 2 hours, they were lost. At 2:47 p.m., Daniel fell. They were roped together on a steep traverse when the snow shelf beneath him cracked with a sound like splitting timber. Javier saw him disappear, just like that, into a cloud of powder. The rope jerked violently, nearly pulling him in after. He dug in his crampons, braced his axe, and screamed Daniel's name into the blizzard forming around them. Nothing. Snow was falling now, thick and sideways. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Javier dropped to his knees, anchoring himself with everything he had. Slowly, inch by inch, he began to pull the rope back. After 7 meters, it went slack. Danielle's body came into view, half buried in a snowdrift below, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Daniel! Still no response. Javier scrambled down, hyperventilating, hands shaking with cold and fear. Daniel's chest moved. Barely. He was alive, but unconscious. Blood trickled from his ear. A bone jutted from his left arm like a snapped twig through fabric. There was no reception, no GPS, no way out. Javier dragged Daniel behind a rock formation to shield him from the wind. He set up the emergency bivvy, huddled them together, and wrapped every ounce of heat between their two bodies. Then he cried, not out of fear, not yet, but because he knew no one was coming. Hour 5, Javier had to decide, stay put and wait for rescue if anyone even knew they were off route, or go back down for help. But how? Daniel couldn't move. The storm was growing worse. Night would fall within hours. He checked their gear. 1 emergency beacon, not working, 2 headlamps, half a bottle of water, 1 chocolate bar, a first aid kit, a map with their original route, 1 rope, partially frayed, 2 sleeping bags, now soaked at the base. He remembered something Daniel had said back at Camp 2. In the high places, it's never man versus nature. It's man versus time. Time was bleeding out of Daniel's body. Javier built a snow wall to block some wind and used gauze to wrap Daniel's arm. He spoke to him, even though he didn't know if Daniel could hear. "You're not dying out here, not you." His own voice sounded thin, unreal. It cracked with cold. By midnight, Daniel was shivering violently. Javier knew hypothermia stages: shivering, then confusion, then stillness. Stillness was when the body gave up. He did everything he could to keep him awake. He slapped him, sang to him, cried into his collarbone. In the absence of rescue, all you have is each other. Hour 14. The wind eased. Javier poked his head out from their tiny snow shelter and saw a sliver of moon. It was enough. He marked Daniel's location with a red ribbon and an empty food pouch, high visibility, and began descending. He had no radio, no signal, no second climber, but he had legs, and he had rage. He walked with the anger of a man who refused to let guilt write his obituary. Hour 15 to 24. The cold was a second skin. He fell twice, sliding 15 feet once into a patch of rocks that tore open his glove and bruised his wrist. He ate the last chocolate square at hour 17, drank melting snow from his glove. By hour 20, the stars were gone. By hour 21, clouds returned. By hour 22, snow fell again. He pushed on, blood in his mouth from a bitten tongue. A song stuck in his head, something his mother used to sing. He cried again, not out of weakness, but out of the animal's certainty that pain was the only real thing left in the world. Hour 25, Base Camp 2. The tent was torn open by wind, supplies half buried in snow. But the radio worked. Javier's fingers bled as he turned the dial. Anyone copy? This is Base Camp 2. Climber down. Repeat, climber down. Coordinates unknown. Please respond. He's dying. Static, more static. Then, copy. This is Mountain Patrol 7. Who's down? Repeat, who's down? Javier screamed. Hour 26 to 30, rescue in motion. A rescue chopper couldn't fly until dawn. The weather wasn't clearing fast enough. 2 mountain patrolmen left by foot at 5:30 a.m. Javier, against their orders, went with them. They moved as fast as they could up terrain Javier had already descended, knees screaming, lungs raw. He kept repeating one thing to himself. Hold on, Daniel. As if Daniel could hear him from miles away. As if his voice mattered more than time. Hour 31 to 36. The climb back. The rescuers, Marco and Emilio, were both seasoned Andes veterans. They wore black patrol gear, carried emergency sleds, oxygen, and a compact medical kit. They weren't there to hike. They were there to extract. Javier couldn't feel his feet after the first hour. Still, he refused to rest. Marco tried to slow him down, tried reasoning. "You'll kill yourself if you collapse before we find him." But Javier's eyes were glassy, wild. "If he's dead," Javier croaked, "I'm dead too." No one argued after that. They moved faster. At hour 34, a whiteout hit them mid-slope. Visibility dropped to a meter. Snow pelted them sideways. The trail vanished. Marco pulled Javier aside. "We wait." "No," Javier said. "I marked the spot. There's a red pouch. I said we wait." Javier shoved Marco, screamed, collapsed. Emilio knelt down beside him. "He's dehydrated." They gave him electrolyte powder mixed with melted snow. Javier threw it up minutes later. "I have to get to him," he whispered. They waited anyway. By hour 36, the storm eased again. Hour 37. The ribbon Javier was first to spot it. Half buried under a powder drift, a strip of red cloth flapping weakly like a dying signal. They raced forward. The rock outcrop still stood, barely visible under snow. The bivvy shelter had caved in. Danielle's body was half exposed, lips blue, one eye open but unfocused. Javier dropped to his knees. "Daniel!" Daniel didn't move. Emilio checked for a pulse. "Faint," he said, "but he's alive." Javier broke. His cry came out as a rasp, somewhere between a sob and a growl. Marco radioed for emergency evas. Patient hypothermic compound fracture unresponsive. And the three of them began stabilizing Daniel for transport. They slid him onto the sled, secured him with rope and insulating wrap, then began the descent. Time had turned brittle. There were no seconds, only inches and breath and the sound of snow crunching under boots. Hour 42. The long way down, halfway down the ridge, Javier's vision began to swim. He was hallucinating. Birds flew past his head that weren't there. His father's voice echoed through the snow. A shadow of Daniel, fully upright and grinning, walked beside him. He smiled back. Marco caught him as he fell sideways, whispering nonsense about orange trees and Sundays. "Javier, stay awake. Talk to me." "My dad's in the snow." "What?" "He's there. I saw him." Marco slapped his cheek. "Don't sleep." Javier blinked, nodded, and stood again. "Let's go." Hour 48. Base Camp 2. Return. The sled rolled into base camp at 7:12 a.m. Daniel was barely breathing, but his vitals were measurable. The med team loaded him into a stretcher and wrapped him in hot blankets while injecting warm saline. An oxygen mask sealed over his face. Javier refused to sleep. He sat outside the med tent, staring at the zipper. They let him see Daniel for 1 minute. Daniel's face was pale and sunken, his lips cracked, his eyes fluttered open briefly. "Hey," he said, voice like paper tearing. "You're not dying here," Javier replied, and broke into tears. Daniel smiled. Hour 49 to 54. Helicopter out. Weather cleared enough to fly by late morning. Javier and Daniel were loaded into the rescue chopper along with one medic. The takeoff was bumpy, air thin, snow erratic, but they lifted above the mountain like ghosts freed from a frozen grave. The Andes stretched below them. The same ridges that had nearly killed them now looked peaceful, blue and white folds like a sleeping lion. Javier looked down and thought, I left part of myself up there. Hospital, Santiago, Chile, our 60-plus Daniel underwent surgery to repair his fractured humerus and a cracked orbital bone. He suffered frostbite in 3 fingers, one of which had to be partially amputated. The doctors called him lucky. Javier was treated for severe dehydration, altitude sickness, and early-stage hypothermia. He slept for 20 hours straight after arriving. When he woke, his mother was sitting beside the hospital bed. She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and cried. Day 4, the press news broke of the incident 3 days after the rescue. Argentinian climber survived 72-hour ordeal in Andes. Rescue team reaches stranded mountaineers just in time. Miracle on Marmolejo. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Javier refused interviews at first. When one reporter shouted, "Would you do it again?" from across the parking lot, he finally turned. "Yes," he said, "but I'd listen to my instincts next time." Daniel's recovery. Daniel stayed in hospital for 2 weeks. He regained full cognitive function, though doctors said his left arm would never be quite the same. He didn't mind. "It still works," he joked, flexing fingers slowly. "Just enough to hold a beer." Javier visited daily. They talked, watched old mountaineering videos, and even laughed. One evening, Daniel said, "I don't remember the fall." Javier nodded. "But I remember you yelling. I heard your voice. That's why I held on." Javier didn't reply. He couldn't. His throat tightened with emotion. Day 15, the mountain again. They stood together in the hospital garden. Javier turned to Daniel. "Do you think we made a mistake?" Daniel thought for a long time. "I think we made a decision," he said. "That's what climbers do. Sometimes you get to walk away. Sometimes you crawl." Javier smirked. "You didn't crawl. I dragged your ass." They laughed, hard and full, and for the first time since the fall, the Andes felt far away. Utro. 3 months later, Javier returned to Bariloche. He didn't climb again for 3 months. He spent time with his mother, worked on gear repair, spoke at a local mountaineering school. He showed them pictures, frozen fingers, whiteouts, rescue sleds, and said one thing to every class: the mountain doesn't forgive shortcuts. But sometimes, if you respect her, she gives you back what you thought was lost. He paused. Sometimes she gives you a second chance. Story 2. The Last Breath of the Mine. The Luis Cardona Collapse. Luis Cardona tasted dust before he heard the sound. It came low and deep, like the throat clearing of a god, an unnatural groan from inside the mountain that made the ceiling of the mine tremble. The air shifted. Somewhere down the shaft, metal screamed. Then the lights went out. In that instant, Luis knew. The mine was collapsing, and no one was getting out the way they came in. Luis Cardona was 41, a second-generation miner in northern Colombia, born with coal in his blood and calluses etched into his palms before he'd ever held a pen. He worked the La Esperanza mine, a vast and aging anthracite operation 70 kilometers outside Bucaramanga. They called it the Dragon. The mine breathed, quite literally. Warm, stale wind would flow through the tunnels during the day and cold air at night. It groaned. It sighed. The ventilation system hadn't been updated in 2 decades. Still, it employed 200 men. It fed whole villages. And Luis, quiet, stocky, heavy-browed Luis, had been there 23 years. He was shift leader of Section C, the lowest access point in the whole mine. Section C was nicknamed El Infierno, hell. It earned the name. Monday, September 11th, 2017, 4:20 a.m. Luis arrived early. His ritual was always the same: black coffee, a prayer to Santa Barbara, the miner's saint, and a quiet moment of stillness before the cage lowered him down. That morning, something was different. Birds, normally loud along the canyon wall, were silent. The air smelled strange, metallic. He shrugged it off. By 5 a.m., 12 men were with him, descending 1,200 meters into the mine. They were used to darkness, but that day, it felt like they were being swallowed whole. 6:12 a.m. Warning signs. Luis was inspecting an old timber brace along shaft 3 when a low vibration hummed through the floor. Dust trickled from the ceiling. "Quieto!" he barked. Everyone froze. For a moment, it passed. But Luis had worked enough collapses, 3 minor cave-ins, 1 major, to know that tremor wasn't natural. He radioed control. "No seismic activity," came the reply. He didn't believe it. Something was coming. 7:05 a.m. Collapse. The sound began like thunder, deep, distant, growing fast. The floor beneath shaft 4 lurched, rocks cracked, the entire tunnel let out a shriek. Luis saw the wall to his left buckle inward. Bracing beams exploded like splinters. Air turned into a hurricane of dust and screams. Half of shaft 4 disappeared behind a wall of falling earth. The lights blinked, then died. 100 meters behind them, the main exit shaft caved in. Section C was sealed. 12 men, no way out. 7:30 a.m. Roll call. Luis activated the emergency glow stick clipped to his vest. One by one, flickers of green and blue lit the darkness like fireflies. "Everyone sound off," he shouted, coughing from the dust. 11 voices answered. 1 didn't. They found Alvaro under a partial cave-in. His leg was pinned beneath a boulder the size of a refrigerator. Luis knew immediately they couldn't move it, not without equipment. And the equipment was now 3 shafts above them, behind 1,000 tons of collapsed mountain. Alvaro knew too. His eyes were wide, tearless. "Leave me," he rasped. "No," Luis said. "You're coming with us." But no one repeated that. 8 a.m. inventory. Luis took stock. 1 emergency water tank, 60 liters, 8 headlamps, 4 dead. 1 emergency beacon, battery low, a pack of chocolate-covered biscuits, 3 oxygen masks, 12 glow sticks, no reception, no outside contact. He did the math. If they rationed, the water might last 2 days. Air, unclear. They were too deep. He activated a beacon, a blinking red light. No confirmation signal, no response. Still, he kept it on. 8:30 a.m. triage. Luis assigned men to tasks. 2 to check the secondary tunnel where old vent pipes once connected. 2 to dig toward the last known emergency exit shaft. 1 to stay with Alvaro and monitor him. The rest to rest and conserve air. It was pitch black except for the faint, eerie glow of their sticks. There's something ancient about underground darkness, something that presses into your mind. Luis felt it in the bones of his skull. So did the others. Men wept quietly, but not Luis. He focused. 10 a.m. discovery. One of the scouts returned with a gasping voice. Vent shaft. Cracked open. Air's leaking in. Luis ran. They found it. A twisted metal duct, fractured, but still drawing faint wind. He placed his face near it. Cool air. Thin, but real. They had a lifeline. He ordered the others to dig around it, widen the opening. If they could crawl inside, there was a chance. A slim one. 12 p.m. First night. Begins. In the world above, sunlight crossed noon. In the mine, it didn't matter. They couldn't tell time. Luis made them sleep in rotations. 3 men at a time, heads on rock, their bodies twitching with anxiety. No one truly slept. Alvaro drifted in and out of consciousness. His leg turned purple by evening. He began hallucinating, whispering about his daughter's wedding. Luis sat beside him, held his hand. Didn't say a word. Day 2, 3:30 a.m. The water tank began leaking a faulty valve. Slow drip. Luis patched it with cloth and a strip of electrical tape. Every drop was sacred. He divided water into plastic caps and counted sips out loud, one per man every 4 hours. Some begged for more. He refused. Day 2, 6 a.m. The digging stopped. The tunnel they hoped to reach was completely collapsed. No way out. Only the vent shaft remained, a pipe 14 inches wide, possibly leading up to the main level. But it was rusted, old, and clogged with debris. Luis made a decision. They would clear it, and one of them would go up. Day 2, 2 p.m. The climb. Luis picked Mateo, the smallest man, 5 feet 6 inches, wiry, light. They tied a cord around his waist, gave him half a biscuit, a note in his shirt with all their names. He crawled in slowly, wriggling upward through sharp metal walls. They fed him instructions through the pipe. For 45 minutes, silence. Then a voice. It's blocked. I can't move. Luis closed his eyes. Back down. Mateo tried. The pipe groaned, bent inward, collapsed with him still inside. The last thing they heard was his scream. The silence after Mateo's death was unbearable. Luis sat with his back to the others, staring at the vent shaft. One of Mateo's shoelaces dangled from the crushed pipe like a piece of skin. Someone threw up. Another started to pray. Alvaro wept. Luis stood, turned. His voice was hoarse but sharp. No more climbing. We survive here until they find us. No one replied, but something passed between the men, not hope, never that again, but obedience. Luis became not just shift leader, he became commander of the underworld. Day 2, 7 p.m. The emergency beacon died. Its blinking light, the one they all had stared at for hours, faded with a final twitch and went dark. Luis didn't say anything. He just walked over, picked up the device, and placed it gently on the ground beside Alvaro. We still have air, he said to no one in particular, and we still have each other. It was both true and a lie. Day 2, night. The hallucinations began. Javier, a 29-year-old father of 2, began giggling. Listen, he whispered. Can you hear it? Water. There's a river in the rock. I can hear it. There was no water, just the sound of his mind breaking open. Luis walked over, sat next to him, put a hand on his shoulder. Talk to me, he said. Javier stared into the dark. My boy, his first word was boom. Isn't that funny? He liked fireworks. Luis nodded slowly. You'll see him again. It wasn't a promise. It was an offering. Day 3, 4:30 a.m. Alvaro died. His breathing had been shallow all night. Luis knew it was coming. He kept a candle lit beside him, a relic he'd found buried in a supply kit. When the breathing stopped, Luis checked the pulse. Gone. He didn't tell the others right away. He waited, sat beside Alvaro's body, crossed his arms over his chest, and whispered a prayer in broken Latin. Only when the others stirred did he speak. He's at peace now. He's out. Some wept. Others stared into the dark like dogs trained not to bark anymore. Day 3, 12 p.m. Luis held a meeting. They sat in a circle, heads bowed, faces streaked with coal and tears. I'm not going to lie to you, Luis said. We have one more day, maybe 2. Water's almost gone. Air is thin. I can feel it. He let that sit. Tell your stories now. If anyone wants to confess or pray or scream, do it now. Silence. Then Javier. I cheated on my wife. Luis didn't flinch. Another man. I stole copper from the mine. Sold it. Every month a third. I hit my sister once. Never said sorry. One by one the men spoke, not to each other, but to something in the darkness. God, guilt, death. Luis didn't confess. He didn't need to. He was already doing penance. Day 4, 3 a.m. Javier collapsed. He'd been coughing for hours, blood in the sputum, pneumonia, infection, too much dust, too little air. Luis held him up as he convulsed, head jerking like a puppet with cut strings. He died quietly. Luis closed his eyes. For a long moment, he thought about letting go, just lying down beside the bodies, giving up. But then he saw something. Light. Real light. Faint. Distant. Orange. From deep inside the shaft, they thought was collapsed. Day 4, 3:10 a.m., Luis ran, crawled, hands shredded on gravel. At the far end of the shaft, a tiny gap had opened, just wide enough for a hand, and beyond it, torchlight. Men, voices, search and rescue. He screamed over and over, and this time, someone screamed back. Day 4, 3:40 a.m., rescue. The breach took 20 more minutes. Luis directed the men, cleared rocks, made room for stretchers. When the wall finally gave way, they were nearly blind from the flood of torchlight. 4 survivors from 12. The rescuers stared, stunned. Luis's voice cracked. Get the dead too. They hesitated. Please, he said, they were mine. They carried all of them out. Day 4, 6 a.m., sunlight. Luis stepped into the morning. It struck him like fire. His knees buckled, not from the brightness, but from the sound. Hundreds of people were there, wives, children, reporters, police. A wave of voices rose, gasps, shouts, weeping. His mother collapsed at the sight of him. Luis couldn't speak. He just stared up at the sky. The clouds had never looked so strange, so alive. 1 week later, Luis gave a single interview. He didn't say much, just this. The mountain is not cruel. It's just hungry. We dug into its heart, and it swallowed us. But I spoke to it. I begged it, and it gave me back some of my men. When asked what he said to the families of the lost, he replied, I say I brought them home. 2 months later, Luis no longer worked in the mine. He moved to the coast, taught safety protocols, spoke at schools, showed kids how to read gas levels and build survival kits. But every night, before sleep, he lit a small candle beside his window for Alvaro, for Mateo, for Javier, and the others. Not because he believed in ghosts, but because the mountain had taken their voices and he refused to let them be silent forever. Story 3, Below Zero, the Alaska crash that should have killed them. The moment the plane hit the mountain, the world stopped making sense. It wasn't fire or screaming or chaos. It was silence, a terrifying, crushing silence that swallowed everything. Then came the cold, blinding, biting, and everywhere. When Lisa Coulter opened her eyes, she was hanging upside down in a shredded fuselage 80 miles from civilization. Blood was dripping from her scalp. The man beside her wasn't moving. She reached for her phone. No bars, no signal, no rescue. It was minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit, and the wolves were already circling. Lisa Coulter was 26, a wildlife videographer working on a short documentary about caribou migration near the Brooks Range in northern Alaska. She'd been flown in on a twin-engine Piper Navajo, along with a small crew. Jake, pilot, Tom, producer, Dana, sound tech, and Avi, camera operator. It was supposed to be a 6-day shoot. They were flying to a remote drop zone near the Atagun Pass. No cell towers, no roads. Everything was snow, rock, and sky. They never made it. February 2nd, 2021, 8:12 a.m. Jake radioed, "Crosswinds heavy. Might have to loop east." They were 15 minutes from the landing site. Visibility was dropping. Lisa was looking out the window, watching the clouds blur into the ground. Then it happened. A downdraft. Sudden. Violent. Jake cursed, yanked the controls. The plane dropped. Lisa's head slammed into the window. Alarm screamed. A wing clipped something. Metal tore like paper. The last thing she heard was Jake yelling, "Hold on!" Then, blackness. 8:40 a.m. Impact aftermath. Lisa came to in the wreckage. The plane had sheared into the mountainside. The tail section was gone. Snow was blowing through the cabin. It wasn't just cold, it was Arctic death. She unbuckled her seat, fell to the ceiling, now the floor. Her boots slipped on blood and insulation. She called out, "Jake, Tom, Dana." A voice faint, "Here, help." It was Dana. Her arm was twisted, her face gashed, but she was alive. Lisa pulled her from the wreckage. Tom was next, conscious but concussed. Abby was gone. Jake was impaled by the yoke, dead. 9:30 a.m. Situation, Lisa assessed. They were on a sloped ridge 6,000 feet up. The nearest outpost was Coldfoot, nearly 80 miles south. No working radio, no signal. Wind chill, minus 41 degrees Fahrenheit. One emergency med kit, 2 survival blankets, no flares, food, 2 bags of trail mix, 1 half-frozen sandwich. Dana was in shock. Tom was vomiting. Lisa took charge. She'd grown up near Anchorage, spent her youth hiking, filming, freezing her fingers to get the perfect wildlife shot. She'd once spent a weekend alone in Denali after getting separated from her crew. This was worse, but not impossible. 10 a.m., the shelter. They needed heat. Lisa used what was left of the tail section to create a partial windbreak. Pulled insulation from the plane's walls and laid it on the snow like bedding. She stacked cargo crates as a second wall, duct taped space blankets to the ceiling. They crawled inside. Tom was babbling now, convinced they'd be found within hours. Lisa didn't argue, but she knew. No one was coming quickly. Day 1, 4 p.m. Snow fell harder. Lisa boiled snow in a metal thermos over a Zippo. She forced Dana and Tom to sip every hour. She made them talk, to keep blood flowing, to fight the exhaustion. Then came the howls, distant, low, then closer, wolves. Lisa stared out the fuselage crack, just trees and white. But they were out there. Day 1, night, Lisa couldn't sleep. Her fingers were raw, her toes numb. She tied bells, taken from camera cases, to a string and hung it along the perimeter. Primitive, but an alarm. She sat by the opening, holding a broken wing strut like a spear. Every 30 minutes, she shook Dana awake, checked her pupils, forced her to drink. She was buying time, nothing else. Day 2, 6 a.m. Tom was worse, feverish, delirious, rambling about hot tubs and cheeseburgers, frostbite on his right foot, 2 toes blackened. Lisa sterilized a needle and lanced the swelling. Tom screamed. Dana passed out. The wolves came closer that night. They didn't attack, but their eyes flashed like coins just beyond the tree line. Day 2, afternoon. Decision. Lisa found a topographic map in the emergency folder. They were here, south slope of Mount Dunarak. The Dalton Highway was due west. She measured. If she moved fast, she could make it in 2 days. But could she leave Dana and Tom? She had to. She left at 3 p.m. with 1 thermos, 2 granola bars, a flare gun, 1 flare, a skinning knife, 2 lighters, a compass. She looked back once. Dana was waving weakly. Tom was whispering something she couldn't hear. She didn't cry. She couldn't afford it. Day 2, 3:20 p.m. Into the wild Lisa walked west. The snow was deep, uneven, and crusted with ice. Each step sank to her knees. Her camera boots, built for stillness, were terrible for this trek. Cold seeped in instantly. She kept her head down, wine slicing her cheeks like razors. Her eyelashes iced over. She wrapped her scarf twice around her nose, cutting her breath to short bursts. Every 10 minutes, she checked the compass. Every 30, she forced a sip of snow melt. She didn't let herself think of Tom, or Dana, or the wolves, or the fact that the flare gun had only one shot. She focused on the next step, then the next. 5 p.m. bear sign. At the edge of a frozen riverbed, Lisa found tracks. Massive, wide set, 5 claws, bear, 2 fresh. She detoured north, keeping the river in sight. Sweat was freezing on her lower back. She whispered to herself, "Don't stop. You stop, you die." Her lips cracked when she said it. 7 p.m., the cold and the dark. The sun vanished. Darkness in the Alaskan backcountry isn't black, it's blue, vast, endless. She found a fallen spruce, hollow underneath. She crawled in, covered herself in snow for insulation, bit into half a granola bar. It was hard as bone. She chewed until her teeth bled. Then she cried, not loudly, just the silent weeping of someone finally understanding she might die. The wolves howled again, closer. Lisa clutched the flare gun and whispered, "Not tonight." Day 3, 5:30 a.m., walking again. Her legs were wooden, one foot didn't respond. Her fingers, 3 of them, were purple. She forced herself up with a grunt that sounded like a sob. Then walked, mile by mile, hour by hour. 11 a.m., icefall. While crossing a ridge, the crust broke beneath her. She plunged 6 feet into a snow well. Her leg twisted hard. She screamed. It echoed off the cliffs. She lay there for 10 minutes, shaking, before forcing herself upright. The ankle was sprained, not broken. She crawled until she could walk again. 2 p.m., a signal. Lisa crested a rise and saw it, a road, just a sliver of black across the snow like a scar on a blank page. She screamed, pulled the flare gun, fired. The red bolt soared into the sky, and then nothing. 3 p.m., collapse. She reached the edge of the road. No cars, no sign of rescue. She lay down, whispered, "I tried." She closed her eyes. 3:27 p.m., the trucker, Don Marshall, was hauling fuel along the Dalton Highway when he saw it. A pink flare's vapor trail over the trees. He almost didn't stop, but something told him to look. He found Lisa 10 minutes later, half buried in snow, one hand still clutching the empty flare gun. She opened her eyes when he called her name. She smiled, then passed out. Same day, 5 p.m. Rescue was scrambled immediately. Lisa, frostbitten and semi-conscious, gave a rough location of the crash. 2 snowmobiles and 1 chopper were deployed, coordinates locked. Day 4, 1:15 a.m. The rescue. They reached the wreckage in the dark. Tom was near death, hypothermic, delirious. Dana had kept him alive by wrapping herself around him for 2 days, whispering stories until her voice failed. They cried when they saw headlights. The wolves, unseen but near, vanished into the trees. Day 4, 4 a.m. evacuation. All 3 survivors were medevaced to Fairbanks. Lisa's foot required skin grafts. 3 fingers lost sensation for life. Tom lost both toes on his right foot. Dana regained full movement after surgery on her arm. Jake and Abby were buried in a joint ceremony near Anchorage. Lisa placed a stone from the mountain on each coffin. Week 2. The world finds out. Wildlife crew survives Alaskan plane crash. Woman treks through Arctic cold to save colleagues. Lisa Coulter, the real Lara Croft? Lisa refused most interviews, but when asked why she went into the storm alone, she replied, "They were my people, and no one else was coming." Week 3. Recovery. Lisa spent 12 days in the hospital. Her feet were blackened, her fingers still stiff. She had mild frostbite in her cheek and lips and severe weight loss. The nurses brought her soup and whispered in the halls like she was sacred. Tom took longer to stabilize. He had hallucinated so deeply in the wreckage that he didn't remember being rescued. He asked repeatedly if Dana was alive. Dana, recovering in a separate room, had lost 12 pounds and was battling mild pneumonia. But she walked within 3 days. The doctors said all 3 of them were biologically remarkable. No one should have survived the impact, let alone 4 days in that cold. Lisa's memory book, a week after release. Lisa began writing. It started as a journal. Then it became sketches. Then bullet points, names, feelings, smells, moments. Jake's hands never left the yoke. Dana's laughter sounded broken in the dark. Tom cried when the wolves howled. He thought they were his wife calling. She called the journal Below Zero. It would later become the name of the documentary. Tom's nightmares. Tom didn't sleep the first 2 nights home. When he closed his eyes, he heard wolves pacing just behind the curtain, not growling, just breathing, waiting. He tried therapy, cried in his first session. "I wasn't strong," he whispered. "I waited to die." The therapist replied, "You lived. That's stronger than you know." He kept coming back. Dana's shift. Dana had grown up thinking she'd never be the tough one. She was an artist, the soft soul. But out there in the snow with Tom dying beside her, she'd become steel. She wrapped herself around him like a human furnace. She told stories, made up fables about sea otters and ice dragons. Even when her voice broke, she kept whispering. After her recovery, she signed up for EMT training. "I want to be the person who shows up next time." Lisa's return to the mountain. 3 months later, Lisa went back, not alone, never again. She took 2 local guides and a journalist from Field and Frame magazine. They flew to the drop zone, climbed to the wreckage site. Snow had buried most of the fuselage, but parts of the wings still poked out like bones. She stood at the crash point for a long time, said nothing, then placed a rock cairn at the edge of the ridge beside the tail. She whispered 2 names, Jake, Abby, then turned and walked away. The documentary Below Zero, the Alaska crash that should have killed him, premiered on a stormy September evening on PBS. It wasn't slick or dramatic. It was quiet, intimate. Lisa's voice narrating snow footage, reenactments cut with raw interviews. Dana sobbed. Tom didn't speak. In one clip, Lisa sat in a log cabin, voice low. "I don't believe in miracles. I believe in grit. In making the call no one else wants to make. And walking into the storm anyway." The film went viral. A letter from Avi's sister Lisa received it 6 months after the crash. "Dear Lisa, I know Avi's body was never found whole. I know the mountain took him fast. But I believe you tried. I believe you carried all of them on your shoulders. Thank you for coming back down." Mira Lisa cried for the first time in months. Not the quiet tears from that first night under the spruce, big, full chest hollowing sobs. The award, Lisa never expected it. A year after the crash, she was awarded the Carnegie Medal for Civilian Heroism. She gave a 2-minute speech. "It wasn't bravery, it was necessity. I had to move. or they would die. I didn't want to be strong. I wanted to survive, and I wanted them to survive with me. 1 year later, the reunion, Lisa, Tom, and Dana met at a trail lodge near Denali. They brought a thermos of cocoa, a copy of the documentary, and 3 pairs of snowshoes. They didn't talk much. They just walked through the cold side by side, boots crunching in rhythm. Then Lisa said, "I never told you what I was thinking out there." Tom looked up. "What?" Lisa smiled faintly. "That I wasn't enough, that I was just a girl with a camera. What could I possibly do against Alaska?" Dana laughed. "You didn't win, but you walked away." Lisa nodded. "And I'll never stop walking." 2 winters had passed. The media had moved on. So had the awards, the interviews, the applause. But the cold? The cold stayed with them. Lisa, Tom, and Dana, their bodies bore it like old soldiers with bullet scars. Every ache in winter, every frost-bitten digit, every still, silent night, it brought the wreckage back. 1. Lisa's walk. She walked the edge of Anchorage every morning. Same trail, same scarf. The therapist had said, "Routine heals." She didn't say much in return, but every time Lisa's boots hit the ice, she saw the ridge, the black trees, that single wing jutting up like a crucifix, the flash of wolves in the timberline, Dana's voice, thin, dying, Tom's silence, the sick crunch of the flare trigger under her finger. Routine didn't erase that. It only taught her to carry it. 2. Tom's return. He limped now, permanent nerve damage. His right foot was an ugly mess, half-toes, frost-burn lines, constant numbness. But he worked. Not TV anymore. He built outdoor cabins, helped veterans in recovery, said less than he used to. But when he spoke, he meant every syllable. One time someone joked about cold. Tom just looked at them and said, "Cold doesn't joke," then left the room. 3. Dana's ambulance. She passed her EMT finals on a snowy afternoon, then signed up for search and rescues training. She joined a volunteer corps in Sitka, hauled injured hikers, patched twisted ankles, chased teens off thin lakes. She kept a flare gun in her locker, never used it, never would, but it sat there like a quiet promise. 4. The letter to Jake's parents. Lisa put it off for months. She finally wrote, "Dear Mr. and Miss Tuller, Jake saved us even after the crash. I know he didn't make it, but we did. And we're alive because of the flight path he chose, the way he shielded the yoke, the last-second instincts he trusted. I wish I could have saved him. I'm so sorry I couldn't. We will never forget him." Lisa Coulter. She didn't mail it. She hand-delivered it and stood with them in the snow saying nothing while Mrs. Tuller held her and cried. The Thing in the Woods. A year and a half after the crash, Lisa went back. Alone this time. No guides, no camera, just her boots, a loaded backpack, and a map marked with 1 black X. It took 2 days to reach it. The wind carved at her cheeks. The cold felt like an old enemy that had stopped trying to kill her, but still wanted her respect. She found the wreckage under 2 meters of snow. She dug for hours, found a section of the wing, a rusted bolt, and what remained of Abby's camera. It was shattered, but inside, a memory card. 6. What the camera saw. The card was mostly corrupted, but 1 file opened, footage from 2 hours before the crash, Abby joking with Dana, pretended the plane was a spaceship, Tom rolling his eyes, Lisa laughing quietly in the background, Jake sipping coffee, focused on the controls, then a shot from the window, white wilderness, trees, movement, a shadow of something, fast, large, a wolf, a moose. It darted out of frame before the image pixelated. She replayed it 50 times, not because it mattered, but because it reminded her they were alive before the fall, and maybe they'd learned how to live again after it. 7. Speaking at the school. They invited Lisa to speak at a middle school in Kenai. 20 kids, a chilly gym. She brought the broken wing strut, set it on a table. "This was part of our plane," she began. "It was sharp, cold. I used it to defend my crew from wolves. I used it as a walking stick. I used it to dig out snow for shelter." She held it like a sword. You never know what's going to save your life. It could be a broken piece of metal, or the decision to stand up when you want to lie down, or the one person next to you who says, "We're not giving up today." A boy raised his hand. "Were you scared?" Lisa smiled. "Every second." 8. Tom's final journal entry. 1 year to the day, he wrote, "It was cold." That's what everyone remembers, the cold. But I remember the silence, the way time stopped, the way Lisa looked like a ghost walking away from us, the way Dana whispered made-up bedtime stories to keep me from slipping away. We died, all of us, at least a little. But sometimes dying a little makes the part that lives stronger. I still hear the wolves. I think I always will. But now I howl back. 9. The Firelight reunion. 2 years after the crash, they met again. Lisa, Dana, Tom, a cabin near Talkeetna. No camera crews, no noise. They cooked rabbit stew, played cards, laughed until their ribs hurt. Then, after midnight, Lisa brought out the flare gun. 1 shot left. She aimed it at the stars, paused, then lowered it. "No need," she whispered. Dana placed her hand over hers. "We're already found." 10. The final memory. Lisa dreamed of a mountain sometimes, but not the crash, not the blood, not the wolves. In her dreams, she was standing beside the wreckage, holding that wing strut, and sunlight was falling over the snow like gold dust. Everything was quiet, not the silence of death, but the silence of peace. She stood still in that dream, and then she walked forward into the cold, smiling